And that ends up I'm like, what? Yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah.
Well, now that we're live, after
Yeah, that's
um,
our opening music.
I mean, that's right. It's kind of like a hand-drawn thing. Anyway, happy Friday, Justin.
Hello,
Basically,
happy Friday.
we're just doing something a little bit, taking a step back a little bit and going back to something near and dear to my heart. Again, as I said before, backups, important thing. It's kind of the most neglected. The only thing probably more neglected than backups is log review. And
Yeah.
in the hierarchy of IT, backups,
Definitely.
but backups are, they're tedious, they're hard. People don't really understand them, but they're super critically important.
And most people don't realize they need them until they need them.
Correct.
And then it's too late.
Unfortunately. So before we dive in deep, I was going to say, hey, thank you to everyone for liking and subscribing. We're getting some great feedback from all over the place. People we don't even know, but we're going to get to know you now. So we're super happy. Thank you. And if there's anything that is useful, please pass it along. If there's anything you want us to cover, please shoot it to us in an email or visit our site. Submit a question. Thanks, Matt, for throwing that link up there. We love that. We'd love to go over anything you want to know. We'll do our best to kind of do it. So we're doing these live, as you tell. And so this is a step back. As a step back again, for what the thing is, we're talking about backups, and really at a more like fundamental one-on-one level of like, hey, what is a backup? What does it do? Why do I need it? And I think that we get kind of like consumed, or we get like there's a big like, oh, you got business continuity and disaster recovery and synthetic backups and all this other stuff going on here. Like words don't like people throw around like marketing terms, but like fundamentally, what is it? So the way everything we do, you guys can just get started, and I said, like, Justin, what's a backup?
So the easiest way to think of it is a backup is a second copy of your data that's not the first copy. It's separate, something else. So it's that the idea is that if something happens to your data, you don't lose it. You go to the other copy of it and get it. That's in the most basic sense what a backup is.
Right. It's basically making like a photocopy of the data.
Yeah.
Taking it and putting it like in a box somewhere and then updating it regularly. Simple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where we get into different strategies and different things like that. Backup doesn't necessarily need to be updated regularly if you're backing up just something that doesn't change. So if I've got, make a copy of my birth certificate, for example, I don't need to do that every week because it's not going to change. I've got, 2 copies of it, and that's safe as a backup. And if something happens to one, I can make another one. Where we get into needing to update it is because when we look at like the data, it changes constantly. Every time you open up a file and put something into it, now it's a new version of that file, or if other people put data in. So that's where we start looking at things like having backups run on a regular basis so that you're capturing all of those changes. And tied into that is the idea of versioning as well, so that you can roll back to other versions. So if I make a change to a file now and back it up, and I make a change to a file tomorrow and back it up, and I make it and continue that, and I realize I want to look at last week's file and roll back to that version as well.
That's a really good way to put a version, but we'll get there in a second before we get too deep.
I don't want to get
that's dangerous territory there. So one thing I always hear a lot of is I have a RAID.
Yeah.
I have multiple disks. I don't need a backup.
Yeah, so just to, for anyone who doesn't know, RAID is acronym stands for Redundant Array of either individual disks or Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks. The idea there is it's a system. We should probably do another episode about that specifically, but the short version is it's a way to protect yourself from having if a hard drive dies, you don't lose any data. And yes, thank you for that up there. RAID is not a backup because it is it's called redundancy.
Right.
If you lose a drive, the data is protected because it's redundant. But if you make a change to a file or delete a file, it replicates that change instantly. So it's not a backup, because if I delete that file, it's gone on both copies. The idea is that it protects you from that failure, not the ability to get anything back. So
Yes.
RAID is absolutely important on servers. You should have it. It protects you from an accidental data loss, but it isn't a backup.
Correct. It protects you against the thing that the technical term people use is a single point of failure. But that's but we'll get that another day. That's a great topic. Put that into the hopper. The other one that I hear quite a bit is what's backup versus disaster recovery. And then after we kind of explain that one, I have another one I'm going to throw in there, a little spice to make it more interesting.
So disaster recovery is... Disaster recovery includes your backup strategy. The idea with disaster recovery is, what is your plan to get your stuff up and running again? So at the base level, and go back to backup, at the base level, backup could just be making copies of your files to have the data. Or if you've got a program running like QuickBooks or FileMaker or some other database, something like that, it's keeping a copy of that database. But those types of systems, having the database itself isn't enough to get back to work. You need the program that's set up to run it. And in some complicated setups, some larger programs, you need multiple servers to do that. So having a disaster recovery plan is the ability not just to say, like, okay, the data is safe, I have it, but a way to then access that data. Disaster recovery is tied in also with the term business continuity, which is same kind of idea, is that, if you're backed up, the data is safe, you're not going to lose it. But what having a business continuity plan with disaster recovery is, how do we then use that backed up data in our day-to-day? How do we get back to the day-to-day from that?
Correct. I was a term that's used quite a bit is operational continuity, but in terms of like keeping your business operational. And one thing I think is really important that we stress here is that business continuity is more than the IT function. It goes beyond IT.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It could be about HR. It could be about delivering product. It could be about keeping whatever that is. And I think for what we're seeing in this, in our company and our clients as well, is the COVID crisis is a great example of a business continuity plan. Like, hey, by the way, our office is completely unavailable for whatever reason. And if you're reading old days, it was like, hey, there was an earthquake, or there was a flood, or there's a fire. Obviously, this is a different scenario, but the responses are similar. And the scenarios demand that. So I think a great way to think of it is backup is copy, disaster recovery is the whole system, and business continuity is the business function to keep your business and your operation going. Is that a good way to think of it? I mean, that's how I kind of define it, but
you're dropping out a bit there.
Okay.
So just to go,
sorry about that.
Business continuity is the keeping the business process running, is to make sure that things can continue to run. And that it should, business continuity plan should include things like having everybody's emergency contact, having a procedure in place that you've told everybody that, hey, in an emergency or in a situation where things are going to be different, this is how we're going to contact you. This is what we're expected of you. Those types of things.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So maybe we should start talking about we got a little piece about internet redundancy.
That's
exactly. Actually, it's interesting you say that is a critical component in business continuity plan is an disaster recovery plan is in internet connectivity from multiple paths, multiple sources. Unfortunately, I'm home, so it's not quite as easy. There's not many options available. So I think maybe you should we'll dive into a little bit about different kinds of backups and some recommendations around that, and go into that. So, let's maybe start with, in the beginning, we were talking about servers, I think kind of like where most data, like critical data lives. Let's talk about some of those things. How that works.
Sure. So when you're thinking about a server, it's generally doing one of a couple of things. It's either storing data that you're like files that you're accessing, or it's running some type of program or service. And based on what that server's doing, there's generally speaking two types of backup that you would look at: a file-based backup or an image-based backup. And the idea between those is a file-based backup is just copying those files. And for something like a simple file server, that could be a very cost-effective and easy way to just make sure that that data is protected. For something that does any kind of application or any kind of service, or has more intermediate or advanced security requirements, an image-based backup is more comprehensive. What that does is takes what's called a snapshot of the entire server and copies it in a way that you can recreate that entire server. Whereas a file-based, you'd have to, load those files into something, and then you can get access to it. The image-based, you can then either spin up in the cloud, put on other hardware, but the server exactly as it was comes back the same way.
Yeah.
The pros and cons of the two. Image-based backup can be more expensive depending on what you're doing. And for large data sets, if you've got 20, 30, 40 terabytes of data, it may not be the best way to do that because you're trying to snap all of that data all the time.
Right.
For things like that, sometimes a file-based system can work.
Right.
There's also two distinctions between both of those. Have two different distinctions in them. There's a local and offsite.
So
So in total now we've got four. You've got image-based local, image-based offsite,
right.
File-based local, file-based offsite. The importance there and pros and cons of those, you want to have both. Local is much faster to do because it's there, much faster to restore from, and much faster to get back. So local is great for the most recent couple of backups. You don't necessarily need your history there. Offsite is where you would put both the most recent ones and historical ones. The idea there is that if something really bad happens, and like we're saying, the fire, the earthquake, the pipe burst, those kinds of things, you can go to the offsite version. Whereas if it's just like the data got corrupted, or even there was malware on the server, you can restore the one from local. Matt popped up a note. It's a good point. That there's offsite used to always mean some kind of storage box, like rotating drives or taking things off.
Wait, are you saying that my Travan drives are not okay to use anymore?
No, cloud is the way to go for backup, mostly because you're paying somebody else to ensure that the data is reliable. They're doing all the rotation. They're making sure the drives are up and that the physical drives are up and running. They're making sure that that stuff is available and giving you that storage. And you can count on, if you put data on a hard drive or on a tape and you don't touch it for months, years, how do you know that it's still there? How do you know that it's still good? You don't, because you're not doing those maintenance tasks. And cloud services will. So with the exception of, again, very, very large backup sets that make cloud prohibitively expensive, that's the best way to go.
Also, it eliminates the human aspect of, I don't know if in my career, I've definitely spent times out doing tape jock work where you're sitting there and swapping out tapes, libraries, and sort of stuff in a magazine, and it's definitely not as simple as you think, and as easy. A lot of human error issues that can come into it, and stuff like that. And tapes are, in one breath, very, very rugged. They can last for years. But they can also get demagnetized, they get damaged easy, they get lost, and a lost tape could be devastating to a business because the whole data set get ruined, that sort of thing. So, generally speaking, we don't use tapes unless there's like a very specific reason why we would use tapes. One thing that we get a lot of questions about is workstation backups. Like, hey, I have all this data on my workstation. Well, should I back it up? A lot of companies are like, don't put anything critical on the workstation, put it on the server. But that's kind of not always the case, right? So especially now with everybody working remote, the thought that there isn't going to be important data on a workstation is I think that's just silly. People are always going to save. People are always going to get something and say, I'm going to save it to my desktop because that's where it is, and I'll see it. And then Right.
So the good news is that the two big services that we work with for like Office Suite, so Office 365 and G Suite, both have a tool in Office 365 is OneDrive, and in G Suite it's a file stream that can back up your desktop documents, pictures, folders from your workstation.
Right.
So at the very least, that's a file-based backup, because anything that you're putting there, you're uploading into the cloud and you're keeping it a second copy of it there. So those are very easy to set up if you've already got that licensing and stuff configured.
Right.
There's also other backups that you can do, both file and image based. For
Right.
workstations, file based backup is usually the best way to go, because most of what's on the workstation is not like a program that's running. But in some cases, if you've got something like some application or some software that you're running that has like a lot of customizations and takes you a long time to get just right, or things that have to be configured a certain way, image based will save you time because you can restore back and have all those things there. But otherwise, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Justin. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I was going to say, I know. It's true. As I said, important topic to both of us. We actually got a question from Stephen Kaup. He's our loyal question asker.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a great one. What is the fastest and most economical recommendation to back up your entire team's computers working from home in this current environment if they're not working exclusively on the company server? Great question, and honestly, a really complex problem that we're not going to see the end of right away, and the fallout of that could be months or years in the making. So what's our stance, I should say?
The first thing I'm going to go back to is if you have Office 365 or G Suite, if you have the licensing that includes unlimited storage, that's a G Suite Business or E3 for Office 365. Use OneDrive and Team Drives to grab all that data. That's going to automatically do. So I do that on my laptop and my desktop in the office. It keeps them in sync and with OneDrive, and anything I put on my desktop or in my documents folder or even my pictures folder is backed up and protected. So that's the easiest way, and in a lot of cases the cheapest way, because if you already have those licenses, you're paying for it. Just needs to be installed and configured and set up.
Exactly.
If you don't have those, there are products that can back up workstations. They're usually very easy to install. We, for our customers, work with a product from Datto that can do both file and image-based backup, and we can deploy that through our tools to our customers very easily. For people that aren't working directly with us, you can look for something similar that does a workstation backup and deploy it to machines. But even then, I'm going to say the baseline of G Suite or OneDrive is a great place to start, especially if you have those licenses. You're paying for it. You can use it.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, and one of the questions is one of the things that we've been kind of grappling with is having people protecting their data that on home. And one of the things that has come with personal laptops, right? Segmenting out my personal data from my business data, and really important that you do talk to your either your IT department or your MSP or your service provider, because there are standards that may be there depending on what kind of industry you're in, depending on what kind of data you're creating. It's really critical because you could be exposing yourself and the company to some kind of liability because the data may not be protected properly. So, but be thoughtful on this, because it could be an exposure that's bad. But that being said, after speaking with your company or your support team, is there, what other ones would you recommend? I know I've seen a couple out there: CrashPlan, Backblaze.
Yeah, I use Backblaze for my computer at home for HomePlan. Works really well. The the corporate version of it too has a management console, so you can see the important thing for your IT department to on their end is something that can do reporting and show successes and failures, so that they can review it and be able to say that yes, the stuff is backed up, no, it hasn't. For home use stuff, Backblaze, CrashPlan, those kind of things, they'll send you an email if you haven't backed up in a few days, and depending on what you're doing on your home machine, that might be good enough. I know mine, if my computer's off for 24 hours, which never happens, but if it is, I'll get an email that says,
Right.
"Hey, your computer hasn't backed up today. Go check on it and see what
And,
happened." And
and
I don't not adding so much data throughout the day that makes
right.
a big difference.
The only other thing I would recommend is if you have a Mac or a Windows machine, the onboard OS has a backup that you can
Mhm.
offboard to a local hard drive.
Mhm.
Might be a great idea because those are both image-based backups of the system, so
Mhm.
they make them restorable. So
Yeah,
and this as a kind of like a if if you're just not in a position to do a recurring charge, that sort of thing. I would definitely recommend using
yeah.
the built-in tools to back your stuff up.
Absolutely. The important thing to keep in mind there, though, is that if you're going to use an external hard drive, leave it powered on and connected to your machine as often as possible. Hard drives will, if like if you have a hard drive and you keep it in a desk drawer, or you keep it, in a safe somewhere, there is a chance that the next time you go plug it in, it's not going to work. Hard drives can fail, especially being moved
Right.
around, and by keeping it plugged in and running, you'll be able to get an alert on your system. It'll tell you when it's starting to fail, so that you know you need to replace it, as opposed to, like, oh, I have it on a hard drive, and you go and plug it in and it's just dead. Now,
Yes.
if you're going to, and especially for small important files that you want to keep, and you do want to put like in a lockbox or fireproof safe, thumb drives are actually really great for that, because they don't have moving parts. It's what's called flash memory, that's very resilient to just being left somewhere and sitting. Definitely don't do this, but I have accidentally left a thumb drive in my jeans and washed it, and it still works afterwards.
That's
So
pretty cool, actually.
yeah, it's I was like, this thing is going to be gone, and I plugged it in, and I could get stuff off of it. So
Right.
definitely important files, documents, pictures that you want to keep, those kinds of things. You can get fairly large thumb drives, fairly low cost these days, and throw that stuff on there. Throw it into wherever you keep your important documents, and that could be enough of a backup for your personal stuff. It all depends on what you're doing, what you're keeping. You don't necessarily need that, running every day type thing.
Correct. I was not to bring it back full circle, but that might be much like the birth certificate example.
Yeah,
Like that's a great example. Like my scanned, my insurance information, my passport, my all
Mhm.
that sort of stuff. That's critical. But once again, be careful with those data because that could be used as identifiers, which is another topic for another
Yeah,
day.
another day.
Scanning and putting personal information on places that are not secure.
Yeah.
So we'll get that as a whole other thing. Justin, what else do you think is important that anyone knows about backup before we
I
kind of?
think the last piece I think here that's important is the idea of cloud backup, not just backup offsite, but backup of cloud services. And this is
Oh
less
yeah,
for personal, more for business
that's a great point.
purposes. The most cloud services, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, work on what's called a shared responsibility model. The short version of that is they will protect you from them. They will not protect you from yourself. So, Microsoft, for example,
Right.
backs up the data that's in Office 365, backs up the data that's in OneDrive. But that is more akin to RAID, like we were talking earlier, the redundancy, than it is to a real backup. If you delete a file, and yeah, there's some protections in there, the recycle bin, and recover those deleted. But let's say you delete a file, all that that time has passed, and it's gone. It's gone. You've told Microsoft you don't want this anymore. They're
Right.
going to honor that, delete it. So
It's
we
isn't the time period 30 days, 29
by
days?
default, there's the 29-day period on a
29
deleted
days.
file that you can recover. There are ways to extend it depending on your settings and what kind of data you're talking about. But what we always recommend is always a third party backup of that data, and that is what's called
Right.
a cloud to cloud backup. And the idea there is that just like on your server, it does snapshots multiple times per day, copies all of that data out, and now you've got another copy of that.
Right.
So that's very important. There's a bunch of them out there, and really any of them are good, because it's just an extra layer to protect yourself.
I know we here at Valiant, we're a big Datto partner.
Mhm.
So we use a product called Backupify. It's one
Yeah.
of their core products. We use it pretty religiously. Really happy with it.
Mhm.
And you know, it's important for us to protect that data across multiple clients and data sets. You know, that
Yeah,
sort of
and I think one of the again, from a business perspective, one of the really nice things that you can do with that is, so as we said, let's say we're going to take Office 365 or G Suite as the example again. You can protect that data. You can keep that data as long and put protections on it like litigation hold and store that data. But in order to do that, you have to keep the license. So for
right,
G Suite, that's $12 a month. For Office 365, $20 a month. If you're doing that for people who are no longer working with you, but you want to keep their data, having it in a backup like Backupify is a great way to save money on that, because the Backupify licenses are much cheaper than the full
right.
Office 365 or G Suite license. And if you ever need to get that data back, there's a way to restore that data without having to pay for it continually.
That's a great, you know, I think what we'll do is that's going to be something we do as a separate, you know, one thing we're thinking about is going to deeper dive into backups, depending on
Mhm.
how this is received and if people like it. Um, so that we can go deep dive into each one of these kind of backups and some of the
Mhm.
pieces, and especially backup recovery and disaster recovery and business continuity. So with that, I'm going to stop because you and I could probably go for another
Yeah,
two
and go on
hours
this
on this.
forever.
I know it's like we're getting yelled at online here, so it's great. I love it. Stop talking. so, um, so please, once again, thank you so much for really appreciate it. Hope everyone's staying safe out there. I know it's tough times, and it's great that we're able to do this, and it's
Mhm.
really been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so one thing, our next session that we're going to do on Monday is going to be around list laptops.
Mhm.
It's kind of a mundane topic, but it's actually one that's super kind of topical today, or you know, around the time period, and there's different options out there. And as more and more people are working remotely and have to move back and forth, and hopefully when we start getting back to moving more freely around, we're going to want to have that laptop versus
Mhm.
having to, you know, have data all over the place or different setups. So with that, I'm going to say, Justin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great Friday,
You
and
too.
we'll see you on
See you
Monday.
guys on Monday.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Really
All
appreciate
right,
it.
take care.
All right. Bye now.